Hello and welcome to the CNBC TV 18 special. I'm Shireen Bhan. A fortnight after Prime Minister Modi announced a surgical strike on black money, there is concern and confusion on the near-term impact on the economy. The Finance Minister today, speaking at the BJP Parliamentary Party meeting, has admitted that this operation, and that's the word that he used, will cause growth to slow down in the short term, but it will have a transformational impact in the long term. Speaking to his party colleagues this morning as well, the Prime Minister has reiterated that there can be no debate on demonetisation. He says those who oppose it oppose the fight against black money. But the script is starting to change, or at least the sequencing of government action is starting to change. The Finance Minister this morning saying that the focus now shifts to the rural sector, and he claims the government is ready with a war chest to aid the rural economy. The government has also asked card companies and banks to waive the transaction fee on the usage of debit cards and also incentivize plastic money. To get a sense of the reality on the ground and talk about near-term solutions, I'm joined by a panel of experts with me on the show. But before we get into that discussion, here is the Finance Minister on the decisions that will be taken to help the rural sector and why he expects lending rates to fall significantly. Listen in.
Decision of legal tender है तो इसके बाद एक रीमोनेटाइजेशन की वैकल्पिक करेंसी लोगों के पास पहुंचे, वो एक कैलिब्रेटेड तरीके से पिछले 15 दिन से 14 दिन से चल रही है और आने वाले 1-2 सप्ताह में बिल्कुल ग्रामीण क्षेत्रों में इसका विशेष रूप से हम लोग प्रभाव इसको डालेंगे। अब बैंकों में जब इतनी बड़ी संख्या में आता है तो एकाएक बैंकों की क्षमता कृषि में, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में, ट्रेड में, व्यवसाय में, उद्योग में ऋण देने की क्षमता एकदम बढ़ जाती है। और क्योंकि ये लो कॉस्ट सस्ता कैपिटल आया है, स्वाभाविक है कि उस ऋण देने की जो क्षमता होगी उसके ऊपर जो खर्चा होगा, जो ब्याज होगा, वो भी अपने आप कम आएगा। बैंकों ने ऑलरेडी कम करना शुरू कर दिया है।
Well, that is the Finance Minister speaking this morning at the BJP Parliamentary Party meeting to take us through what the situation is on the ground and what could be the near-term solutions. I'm now joined by Prabhat Patnaik, Professor at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, Kavita Rao, Professor at NIPFP, Ajay Jhakar of the Bharat Krishak Samaj, Ratna Vishwanathan, CEO of Microfinance Institutions Network, and Shamika Ravi, Senior Fellow of Brookings India. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks very much for joining us on the show. I am going to try and structure this debate the old-fashioned way. All of you will get 90 seconds to make your opening remarks, make your arguments, and then I will come back to you for individual rebuttals. Ajay, let me start by asking you, because today the Finance Minister saying that the thrust of the action from the government is now going to be focused on the agri-economy, on the rural sector. They've talked about a war chest. They've talked about how NABARD is likely to drive sort of spending and drive money into the rural economy. We don't know what those measures will be. We are expecting announcements coming in from the government tomorrow. But if I could ask you for a status check on the ground today, what does the picture look like?
So I'm really surprised at the timing of this demonetization. I think those who are making the policy at the RBI did not anticipate what is happening on the ground, that it was the sowing season and farmers need to buy seeds and fertilizers. I also blame the RBI for not advising the government properly on the consequences of not allowing cooperative banks to exchange or to accept old currency notes. I think the blame squarely rests with the RBI because of the crisis that we are seeing, because it was the job of the RBI to agree to the government or not to agree to the government, or to look at the fine print of the policy. The production, the acreage, the sowing acreage has not changed much. Sowing is happening, but obviously what can be anticipated is that good seeds may not be utilized, or the cost of sowing for farmers is more because traders are giving them inputs that would normally cost 400 rupees for 500 rupees, and those kinds of things are happening. And we hopefully NABARD will infuse money into the cooperative bank, into farmer network on a weekly basis. I'm in touch with the agencies and I think that's going to happen.
Okay, you've still got 19 seconds left, Ajay, so I'm going to throw in a quick follow-up question. You talked about being in touch with NABARD, and that's what we are given to understand, that tomorrow perhaps we could see some announcements. A war chest of about 35,000 crores, and this is not official information, is being talked about. What should we anticipate, and what would you like to see from NABARD and the government? Ajay?
Hello?
Yeah, Ajay, can you hear me?
I cannot hear anything.
Okay, I'll come back to you, Ajay, in just a second. Mr. Patnaik, let me come to you. We just heard from Ajay Jhakar there, representing the agri-economy, so to speak, and saying very clearly that he believes the timing is off. He believes that the blame rests squarely with the Reserve Bank of India. Now, you agree with what Mr. Jhakar is saying as well, and you believe that this has not been either a well-thought-through strategy on the part of the government, neither one that is desirable.
Well, yes, I agree with him, but additionally I also feel that this is a gratuitous inflicting of distress on vast masses of people in the country for gains which are extremely dubious, because the idea that you disable 86% of the total currency in your country in order to attack the black economy is itself an extraordinarily costly proposition, and what is more, it won't even attack the black economy. Let me just give you a very simple numerical example. Now, if we take the size of the black economy, that's roughly a quarter, let us say, at a conservative estimate, which is about, let's say, 35 lakh crores. The maximum which the government itself hopes to disable by way of currency notes in the black economy is 3.5 lakh crores. So the point is that assuming that profits are about half of the total value of the black economy, that means that you are disabling notes which amount to no more than 20% of the annual profits. Now, with that, if you think that the black economy is going to be disabled, then obviously you have got your economics wrong, because the point is the black economy is a set of activities. It is not just a bundle of cash. And consequently, unless those set of activities are made unprofitable or expensive to undertake in terms of legal punishment and so on and so forth, simply disabling cash is not going to hurt the black economy. But in the process, the normal economy has been hurt tremendously. Yes.
Okay, you've made your opening comments, and I'll come back to you for rebuttals, but let me bring in Kavita Rao as well. Kavita, at NIPFP, you were responsible for putting together data on this business of the black economy. The finance minister, the prime minister, calling this an operation against black money. I was looking at comments coming in from Mr. S. Gurumurthy, who's presenting the government's case, and I don't really know where these numbers are coming from, because he says that while it's not just about black money, this is also about counterfeits, and he says, according to one estimate, about 50,000 to 60,000 crore rupees of extremist funding is through cash. I don't know what estimate he's referring to, but give us a sense of the problem that the government seems to want to address by way of demonetization, the size of the problem.
Shireen, I can't really answer your question on that, because unfortunately I can't talk about the size of the black economy. It is large. Our estimates are significantly larger than what Professor Prabhat Patnaik indicated. Our study also sort of says that there are many sectors in which the unaccounted incomes are generated as well as parked. And just by hitting cash, which might be one of the means in which they are generated, only one of the means and not by any means the only means, you are not really going to stop people from doing unaccounted transactions. That apart, unaccounted transactions are not just pure black money coming out of thin air. So they are normal economic activities apart from the illegal activities that might be happening. And the legal activities will have income generation for the rest of the economy, demand generation for the rest of the economy. So trying to do a surgical strike effectively means a surgical strike on the entire economy, not necessarily very fruitfully.
Okay, so you're saying it's a surgical, it amounts to a surgical strike on the entire economy, though you disagree with Prabhat Patnaik on the size of the problem. Kavita, just for the benefit of our viewers, you cannot share those numbers with us because the NIPFP, while it submitted its report to the government has chosen not to make that report public. Am I right?
No, we were asked to sign an MOU with the government that we cannot make it public. So only the government can choose to make the report public.
Okay, so you have the data, but you can't share the data with us, and that's because the government has not made the report public. But let me bring in Ratna now. Ratna, I was getting a check from Ajay Jhakar on the problems that the rural economy is facing. From a microfinance perspective, what is the situation on the ground? We've been talking to NBFCs, we've been talking to microfinance companies, and that while there is that relaxation that may have come in from the RBI yesterday on that grace period that they've decided to give, there continues to be pain on the ground. Give us a sense of the problems that you're facing as part of the microfinance industry today.
Right, Shireen, I shall actually break that up into two bits, because one, you've just spoken about the dispensation given by the RBI circular, and I think it's perpetrating a few myths that need to be displaced. That's one. Secondly, regarding the situation on ground, well, it's a bit of a tenuous situation because, as we are all aware, microfinance clients are basically clients with an annual income of 1 or 1.6 lakhs depending on the geographies they come from, which means they are a fragile, vulnerable lot in terms of the livelihoods that they maintain. And frankly, we actually are working with about 3.5 crore women across all geographies, and they're all from low-income households. So this particular demonetization has affected them in certain ways, because one of the things that they do pride themselves on is the fact of repaying their loans on time. And we have a recovery percentage of 99%, and as Professor Yunus said, it's not because they're being forced to pay, but poor people look forward to repaying their loans because they know that this will enable them to get the next loan. Now we have issues because we had requested, since most of them have very little or limited access to the new tender, we had initially requested both the government as well as the Reserve Bank that we be allowed to collect payment with the old high value notes. The reasons are twofold. A, we are completely, NBFC MFIs who I represent are completely and wholly regulated by the Reserve Bank. All our clients have about, all of them have 2 KYCs, all their data is reported on the Credit Bureau weekly on a continuous basis. So in terms of governance and regulation, this is a particular sector that really cannot be used for muling. And the tab sizes being so small, it couldn't have been. So we had requested, but we are yet to hear back on that, and as of now there has been no dispensation. In the first 10 days between the 9th to the 18th, our collections went down by almost 50%, but slowly after more I think legal currency has been released, there is a people have started coming back and paying, but there is still a demand because a lot of them still have the old notes. That's one.
Ratna, you're out of time. You haven't heard back. I'll come back to you. I'll come back to you. Your time is up. You're saying collections down almost 50%, but you do expect a pickup. You are waiting to hear from the Reserve Bank on whether microfinance accounts can be allowed to use the old currency, but so far there has been no response. Let me go back to Ajay Jhakar. Ajay, we've heard from some of our panelists, and before we lost you, I was asking you what you expect the NABARD to do, what kind of intervention you would like from the government. And I also want to get your point of view, because we've got our reporters out in different parts of the country. My colleague reporting from Dangia village in North Gujarat, and what the farmers there seem to be, and I'm collating all of it for you, saying takleef to bahut hai, par Modi ji ne jo kiya hai wo acha kiya hai. How do you respond to that? Because the popular support still is with this move that the Prime Minister has decided to take.
So I think so you're asking 2-3 different questions, and they, even though are related, but they're completely different questions. First of all,
sure.
what is
so address them one by one.
Hello?
Go ahead,
Hello?
Ajay.
So I think so what NABARD is going to do is they're going to give something like, I would hope they would give something like 5,000 crore rupees per week to the cooperatives to disperse to farmers in this time of sowing. What has also happening with cooperative banks is that they are not being replenished with smaller currency or newer notes. So even those farmers who hold accounts in cooperative banks can't withdraw their money. And other than that, farmers who have taken loans from primary agriculture societies or from cooperatives are unable to pay them on time. So here we have a situation which is, I think, so unprecedented in history of mankind, that people have accounts, they have taken loan, and they're not allowed to deposit money into those loan accounts, and banks are charging them interest. Now farmers are not going to pay interest to banks if you don't take money from us to repay the loans. So is the RBI going to compensate those cooperatives? Because after all, cooperatives are farmer owned. And the second is that we will also lose out on interest subvention. But leaving aside the cooperative banks, the bigger problem that nobody is realizing is that because of this demonetization, the arrival of vegetables and fruits into sabji mandis, into bigger cities, has reduced. And this reduction is not translating into inflation, because even the demand coming from consumers have reduced. So people are buying less, so there is less demand. But as currency comes into the market in the next few weeks or in the next few days, the demand will suddenly rise. But vegetables and fruits coming from the villages will not rise in the same proportion that fast. So it should not be surprising that inflation shoots up. And in the finance minister's meeting that I attended on Saturday, this point was clearly made to the government, that if you do not increase the flow of credit to APMCs to at least pay the transporters for transporting the food, perishables to town, we could face an inflation situation. And to the last point, I'll just take a minute more. The last point that,
I'll come back to you on that one. Let me bring in Shamika Ravi, Senior Fellow at Brookings, India. Shamika, your time starts now, and I want you to start by commenting on the inflation situation, because the government very clearly articulating that we are going to see a fall in inflation and we are going to see a radical cut in interest rates because banks are flush with liquidity. And then, of course, this business of whether the Reserve Bank is going to provide that bonanza to the government or not is a separate issue altogether. But on the inflation point, where do you stand?
Well, the problem is there is such an information void within which we all seem to be making our, estimates, including the government, unfortunately. So, theoretically, in fact, I actually disagree with most of the panel. I think given the magnitude of not just black money, but also the way we do business in this country, where, tax evasion is very much a way of life. Transforming a cash economy into a formal, mobile or an electronic payment economy, a modern, financial economy will require a lot of such moves. But a surgical strike doesn't happen with one weapon. I mean, we've had the demonetization, but it's been 2 weeks and we are yet to hear whether we are going to have any serious, banking governance reform, for instance. Now that the banks are sitting with all this cash, I'm not sure all the banks really deserve to have all these deposits of, ordinary citizens, because not all of them are very well governed. Let's face it, that's number one. Number two, there's nothing on taxation reforms. I mean, there's a reason some of these sectors are so cash rich. I mean, when we talk about real estate, everyone is expecting a correction, particularly because this is a sector where a lot of black money has been parked. But these are theoretical arguments. Deflationary pressures on the economy is a theoretical discussion we make, that when cash goes out of circulation, then naturally all these sectors which are cash rich will see a price decline. But I'm actually surprised at the lack of information. I mean, given that all our banks have, modern MIS, the RBI or the finance ministry should be giving out regular updates on what is happening. How many ATMs have been recalibrated, how much new currency...
That information CNBC has been putting out, Shamika. If you follow us on Twitter, you'll know that we're putting out the information on how many ATMs have been recalibrated. Yes. But your time's up. Let me go back to Prabhat Patnaik and get his comments. Mr. Patnaik, as you just heard Shamika Ravi there, and she believes that if you want to transform a cash economy where 12% of GDP is cash, which, again, there's a debate on whether that is comparable to other emerging markets like China and Thailand, and is India really then an outlier or not? But leave that aside. She believes that surgical strikes like the one that the government has undertaken are the need of the hour, and of course need to be followed up with more action. So it can't just be a one-off, it has to be a package.
If we think of, let's say, credit card use. When I use a credit card, I have the advantage that not only do I use a credit card, but I actually get credit on it. Now, therefore, if we are thinking in terms of providing an advantage to people to move away from cash use to other kinds of uses, then we have to provide them with that kind of an incentive. Now, much of our financial institutions, they do not consider virtually half the population as credit-worthy. And consequently, what we are seeing effectively, officially, is that instead of using cash, you deposit the cash somewhere, say Paytm or whatever, and then use something else in its place. They are not getting any advantage. They are not getting any advantage of additional credit. And all that is happening is that you are coercing them to get rid of cash in order to use some other means of settling transactions. And that I believe is really against their basic democratic rights, because, this is just coercion. You can't push people into a cashless economy. You have to provide them with incentives,
Okay, so maybe the incentivization is yet to start, and maybe we will see that incentivization. Already the government, as our reporter Ritu Singh is reporting, has had a meeting with card companies yesterday and asked them to waive off the MDR fee. So, we've probably started to move, but that is being seen as a short-term measure till the 30th of December. Perhaps these things will continue. But let me bring in Haseeb Drabu, the Finance Minister of Jammu and Kashmir. Mr. Drabu, appreciate you joining us here on the show, sir. I want to first get your comments as the Finance Minister of Jammu and Kashmir. And today we had Mr. Riju in Parliament saying that one of the biggest benefits of the demonetization program has been the fact that counterfeits have come down, specifically in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. In fact, Mr. Gurumurthy, who's representing the government's economic argument, has been insisting that the biggest blow on account of the demonetization has been the end of terror financing in Jammu and Kashmir. First, I wanted to get your point of view on that.
I think it's a little too early to make such generalizations, both on counterfeit existence in J&K and its impact. I think at a macro level, yes, there is bound to be an impact on the entire financing of such activities. But to look at it specifically in relation to J&K, I think it's a little too early. I've heard comments about stone pelting and so on and so forth. So I think it's a little premature, and I think also a little misplaced in terms of linking it directly to the extent of monetization. We have heard strange and bizarre kind of things about the extent of counterfeit in J&K and the extent of, black money in J&K. Currently, what the evidence we have in terms of collections is not being out of line with the national levels. So I would.
What is the evidence on the ground, sir? You're saying that you're hearing strange and bizarre estimates that are being presented. Give me a sense of what we're actually talking about. Mr. Murthy, in his interview to Doordarshan, says that 3% of the total money deposited in the banking system has been deposited in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Can you verify that for us?
I will not be able to verify that. I think that would be a huge exaggeration, in my opinion, because in the first couple of days, we saw about 1,100 is the estimate, and we heard numbers like 11,000, which was clearly a mistake. In terms of the extent of, you have to understand one thing very specific about J&K. It's an economy and a society which has gone through enormous amount of uncertainty. And in such situations, the transactional demand for money is very high, because you're not sure if tomorrow the banks will open, if tomorrow shops will open. So the transactional demand for money is very high. So if the cash to SDP ratio, for instance, is 6% and the national average is like 5% or 3%, that difference is justified by the fact of a very uncertain economic environment. So it's not as if, you know, J&K as a state is full of black money and is cash is being hoarded. I think that would be a complete misunderstanding of the situation. There is no denying the fact that there is terror financing happening, but it need not happen in J&K. You know, it's not as if that is subsumed in that economy. So the levels of deposit, you know, balance that have come up in J&K are not out of line of the national level. And let us wait for the entire thing to happen. So because I think we are in the middle of it and people are jumping the gun by kind of linking it to certain things, which I think is not desirable, really speaking. So my own sense of it
well,
is
the
that
government is doing that, sir, in Parliament. The government is doing that and in Parliament, Mr. Drabu.
You know, I am not sure of the evidence on that. At least I don't have any evidence which would indicate to me that the you know, deposits or the exchange out of J&K is way out of line with the national averages. So once we look at it from that perspective, broadly speaking, Shri, broadly speaking, J&K accounts for 1% of the GDP, and you know, so if you were to see tomorrow that instead of 1%, you have like 5%, I would be surprised. But nothing has come to my notice at the moment where I would be able to either, you know, substantiate these numbers or deny them firmly. So let's wait for a bit and then take a call on it.
Okay, let me very quickly also ask you to react to another development. And I understand that the Ministry of Home Affairs has asked the state government to increase security of banks and cash vans in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, because I understand that there has been a third incident involving a robbery at a bank in Jammu and Kashmir, and the fear is that, you know, it's the new notes that are being looted. Can you confirm this for us?
I am aware of one incident which happened day before at the J&K Bank branches. Yes, there is news. This is the first time this has happened. Obviously, there is distress in the kind of circles, so these activities have increased, and legitimately so. We need to protect bank branches, especially in rural areas, and also branches which have currency chests and all. So there is, for the first time in the last 25, 30 years, we have seen, and this could be an indication of the fact that demonetization has put stress on those activities. That I would certainly think, because for the first time that we are seeing banks being attacked in J&K.
Okay. Mr. Drabu, always a pleasure to speak with you, sir. Thanks very much for joining us. That's the Finance Minister of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Let me bring in a quick word from our panelists. And Kavita Rao, let me come to you, because, you know, you just heard Mr. Drabu there saying that it's premature and misplaced perhaps to draw this link between demonetization and this business of stone pelting and so on and so forth. But I also want to pick up on the ground reports that we're getting in. And a lot of the popular support that this government is getting is because people feel that terror financing will be stopped, that people from across the border will not be able to you know, attack the vulnerabilities of India because counterfeits will stop. You know, your quick response to that line of argument.
Counterfeiting is a process, right? It's not one time. So counterfeiting is what happens on a continuous basis whenever you have people wanting to introduce fake currency. So just because we've introduced a new currency, it doesn't mean people who want to counterfeit will wrap up their businesses and go home. The transition may be difficult. It may take a few weeks, months for them to figure out how to do it. But I don't see the activity stopping just because we demonetized. And on a lighter note, I would think it's important to recognize that in the world of 3D printing today, there is very little you can do to say that I cannot reproduce what I seek to reproduce. So that's basically on a lighter note, but we should take any assertion on this with a pinch of salt. But apart from that, can I add a little bit on the interest?
Yes, Kavita, go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Can I add a statement on the whole claim that interest rates will go down? We are believing that what comes into the bank today stays in the bank. Whether the government chooses to release the money by remonetization or doesn't choose to release it, bulk of it was transactions, money that people used to buy and sell goods and services and to pay for their workers. So expecting that the money will stay in any one account and hence be available for banks to do long-term investments or lending perhaps is misplaced. Only that fraction of the money that people were squirreling away to take care of exigencies is perhaps going to stay in the bank if we force people to retain money in the bank and not remonetize. So I don't expect the banks to be sitting on pots of cash which they will then reduce interest rates in order to lend out. So that I think is jumping the gun.
That may be jumping the gun, but that certainly is the line of argument that is being put forward by the government and North Bloc. On that note, ladies and gentlemen,